The warning came in a whisper, sharp as a blade. Don't move your hand there. Don't take advantage. The rancher heard it clearly, even felt it lodge behind his ribs, a tightness that stole a breath. His fingers hovered over the open ledger on the kitchen table, the thin paper smelling faintly of ink and old coffee. Outside, cattle lowed in a restless chorus, the sound drifting through the screen door along with dust and the dry sweetness of hay. Wind tugged at the fence line, making the wires sing in a tired, metallic hum. Inside, the widow who'd trusted him with her accounts stood at the sink, back turned, rinsing a chipped mug, believing his reputation was as solid as the land he worked. He told himself it was just numbers. Numbers could be moved, adjusted, corrected later. He told himself it was temporary. One season, maybe two, just until the bank eased its grip and the calves fetched a better price. He told himself the ranch had been in his family longer than he'd been alive, and that history counted for something. The warning returned, steadier now, less like a whisper and more like a hand on his shoulder. He swallowed and traced a column with his finger, eyes flicking to the door as if the land itself might walk in and catch him thinking. The kitchen clock ticked too loudly. He remembered fixing that clock years ago, tightening a screw so it wouldn't lose time. He remembered the widow's husband laughing about it, slapping him on the back, saying, "You're a good man to have around." That laugh seemed to hang in the air now, a ghost sound that made his jaw clench. The widow hummed softly at the sink, a tune without words, trusting the quiet the way people trust daylight to come back every morning. He shifted in his chair, wood scraping tile. His hand trembled, just a little. He imagined the bank manager's thin smile, the letter-stamped final notice, the way the fields looked last summer when the rain never came. He imagined his father's voice, rough and patient, saying, "You don't steal from neighbors. You ask. Or you do without." The warning echoed again. Don't. But his mind had already built its defenses, brick by brick, until the word sounded distant and small. He reached for the pencil. The lead scratched softly as he made a mark, a single line where there shouldn't be one. The house seemed to hold its breath. He paused, heart thudding, half expecting the widow to turn around, to say his name, to catch the truth before it hardened. She didn't. The water kept running. The cattle outside shifted and snorted. He closed the ledger with care, aligning the corners as if neatness could absolve him. He told himself he'd make it right. He told himself the land would understand. Yet even as he stood, the warning lingered, not as sound now, but as a weight. Because some movements, once made, don't end when the hand pulls away. The unthinkable didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived with silence so complete it rang. Days passed before the ledger came back to him, set gently on the table as if it were fragile. The widow didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply asked him to sit, and the chair across from her felt heavier than any burden he'd ever lifted. Sunlight fell across the floor in clean lines, exposing dust he hadn't bothered to sweep, the way truth exposes what neglect prefers to hide. "It doesn't add up," she said, tapping the page with one careful finger. Her eyes were steady, clearer than he expected, and that steadiness unraveled him. He reached for words, explanations, excuses, the rehearsed speech about drought and debt. But they collapsed before they left his mouth. He nodded once, the smallest movement, and in that motion admitted everything. The room didn't change, but something in him did, like a gate swinging shut behind a herd. It wasn't the money that broke him. He could have sold equipment, borrowed again, tightened his belt another notch. What broke him was the look that crossed her face. Not anger, not even disappointment, but understanding edged with grief. Trust had been offered plainly and returned altered, and there was no ledger line for that loss. She stood, folded the book, and said she'd find someone else to handle her affairs. Her kindness, intact even then, was the sharpest rebuke he'd known. Outside, the land seemed to take note. A hinge groaned loose on the west gate, and a handful of cattle wandered where they shouldn't, testing boundaries the way consequences do. He chased them down under a sky too wide to hide beneath. The horizon felt farther away than it ever had, as if the world had quietly expanded to give his mistake room to echo. At night, sleep refused him. He replayed the moment. His hand, the pencil, the mark, over and over, trying to find the second where he could step back. He thought about how taking advantage rarely announces itself with drama. It often asks politely, dressed as necessity, masked as survival. It waits for tired hands and anxious hearts, then counts on them to choose speed over care. He went to her house the following week with an envelope and an apology he'd practiced but couldn't perfect. She accepted the money without ceremony and listened without interruption. When he finished, she said, "Doing right after doesn't erase doing wrong before." It wasn't said to wound him. It was said the way people state the weather, plainly, so others can plan. The rancher walked home slower than usual. He fixed the gate, replaced the hinge, and stood watching the cattle settle. He knew the land wouldn't forgive him the way people sometimes do. It would remember in yields and weather and wear. And he accepted that remembering would be part of his work now. He learned, finally, that the unthinkable isn't always loud or violent. Sometimes it's a small, deliberate reach, justified in whispers. And the cost isn't paid all at once, but daily, paid in distance, in weight, and in the quiet work of choosing, again and again, not to make the same reach twice.